Hello everyone, and welcome to our fourth preview stream for Legacy of Morgoth. Today is an exciting day because it's also the day that we have officially announced and released our pre-order program for the expansion pack. You can find that information all over the place on social media as well as on lotro.com. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and I'm a senior world designer working on Lord of the Rings Online. Over the last few weeks, we've been doing a series of streams previewing the landscapes that are coming with the Legacy of Morgoth expansion pack. This is our second to last stream. We've got one more coming up next week. But this week, we're taking a look at the region of Urash Dar. This is the final landscape region for the expansion pack. So the fourth of the four. Next week's is going to be a kind of interior preview, looking at the different interiors and dungeons that are associated with the expansion pack. For those of you that are just joining and are unfamiliar with what this stream is, this is a world design focused stream where I take you through the landscape of Lord of the Rings Online and talk a little bit about what goes into making them happen. The research that we put into it, the pre-production we put in, and the development. Those of you that have been here for the last several weeks have seen kind of each region, and I've talked a little bit about where we are in the progress for the regions. Right now, we're kind of looking out over Imhular, which was the region that we previewed last week, and it's the last region that we're really putting the bells and whistles on. The region we're about to go into, Urash Dar, is one of the regions that is basically done at this point. I'm currently working on building the instance spaces, specifically the raid for this expansion pack. As this is a world design focused stream, I do want to make sure people are aware that I'm going to be answering questions about world design, level design, some stuff about housing as well. I'm not going to be here to talk about things that are outside of my wheelhouse, things that I'm not involved in the process of making the decisions on, those sorts of things. So if you have questions about things like PvMP, lag, the 64-bit servers, new servers when Moria is coming to the two new legendary worlds, Mordor and Angmar. Those are the kinds of things that I can really answer questions about. I'm sure some of you will also have questions about things like the pre-order and whatnot. I would encourage you to seek those answers on topics I can't address on the message boards or by joining one of the other streams that we run. I know Cordovan runs one every Friday afternoon or Friday at noon Eastern time. So feel free to drop in and ask your questions there as well. With that in mind, let's just take a quick look, see how chat is going, and we will start our preview. Don't see any questions yet. So, there's one question that I can answer right now. From King Cookie is, how many people are in the world design team and how many have worked on this specific expansion? We don't typically comment on the number of people in our team. I think for the amount of ambition that we have for the landscape and whatnot for Lord of the Rings, our team is well sized. We can produce a good amount of landscape. So I think to kind of give a non-answer to that question, I think we are well staffed for the level of output that we are creating right now. And Lev Scotland asks, did you guys name these regions or are these names from Tolkien? These are names that we've devised ourselves based off of the research that we've done into these regions. And the areas of the world that we're exploring right now in Nir-Harad are not super detailed in the source materials, particularly in the source materials that we have access to. There's not much more available beyond that. So when we go about creating these kind of regions in areas of the world that aren't as well trodden, in the stories, in the books, we have to come up with, the background for those regions. We come up with the details. We come up with the names. Often we use real-world languages to inspire the vocabulary that are used in these regions. I'm not sure specifically what Chris Pearson used to inspire the languages used in Nir-Harad, and then subsequently the words that are created for this. But that's kind of where we lean, at least in terms of naming goes. So those of you that are linguists, polyglots, um, you will be able to look at a lot of the stuff that's in our game that may sound foreign and fantastical, and find real world analogs to some of those languages to help you decipher the meanings. Um, all right. And then Imagor says, so we have the Oryx mount from the expansion, but we don't have Oryx animals in this location. I don't think we have the Oryxes as creatures that you can encounter in this region, in these regions. In some part because the usage of the Oryx, there's a story intention behind the Oryx and their use. So they may be involved with a faction that is basically giving out these mounts. We'll still have normal horse steeds as well for this expansion. So, alrighty. We are crossing over the bridge and we'll be entering into Urash soon. This is a very big bridge. I love this bridge set. One of the things I'm realizing now that I need to do is set far view on a bunch of stuff, because this should have been, well, very visible from across the river, and it was not. So here we are. We've just crossed into Urash. Urash, as a region, is a very arid, canyony area. You know how last week I was talking about wanting different areas to have different feels, and we have Amberol and Kudzagin being very open areas. And we kind of wanted to push Imhular and Urash into being things that are a little bit more claustrophobic. So while we're on the fringes of these regions, doesn't seem particularly claustrophobic. However, once you get into the region itself, we kind of push that claustrophobia a little bit with the high canyon walls that are keeping you penned in. So here we are. Where are we right now? Let's see. Sir Akil. This is an ancient Numenorian, basically dike used to, broaden the river a little bit. At one point this river became very narrow, but the Numenorians wanted to travel further up the river, so they used these structures to kind of broaden it and push back the land, basically. It is one of the few spaces too in Urash that is like fully lush like this. Along the rivers and whatnot, there's certainly a lot of palms and whatnot, but this is like one of the few fully lush areas right here. Soft Snake GR said, you said in forums that the next premium homesteads will be elf style. What elf style would that be? Lothlorien, Lorien, Rivendell, or Mirkwood? Rivendell. We've got a great spot picked out for it. The designer who was working on it, because he wanted to, he hasn't built a neighborhood since the original housing neighborhoods were introduced a decade and a half ago. So he wanted to kind of play around with that. He hasn't built a premium neighborhood before, so he wanted to stretch his creative efforts with that a little bit. So right now we're all working very hard on the expansion pack. So that has put the work on the Rivendell neighborhood on pause. But once we are kind of buttoned up on Rivendell, or on the Legacy of Morgoth, we will be switching back into working on our other projects, which includes the Rivendell neighborhood. All right, so one of the fun things here about this particular camp is it looks pretty sparse right now, but this is where Maid of Lions is basically staging a lot of his quest NPCs for the Song of Waves and Wind epic line. So as you progress through the quest here, you'll see this hub in particular become more and more populated. I think one of the things that we always kind of joke about is whenever we do something like this or do something like Hit Bolt, about wanting to like make our own Normandy, right? Like if anyone's played Mass Effect, oh hey, cool turtle, yay sand turtle, tortoise. I didn't realize we were getting a new appearance for them. Awesome. One of the things we always kind of joke about with doing stuff like that is, wanting to have a Normandy experience where like your actions in the game change a hub basically, change a town. Hitbolt does that very extensively, and was somewhat expensive in terms of creation. Um, but other times we do it in a smaller scale, like what is being done by Made of Lions at that particular camp, as you'll see it grow with more and more NPCs along the line. All right. This was a fun place to build up here. Um, I really like these new assets that we've gotten because, like, square assets are a lot of fun to work with, but it's really tricky to make those spaces feel exciting if you stay too square. So you have to find interesting ways to change the layouts of things in order to make those very blocky assets work in a way that feels like it would be naturally built. So we're taking a quick detour here to head to the west. When we were looking at Amberol, you could kind of see one of the access points into this region from there, but the road has been blocked off through landslides and whatnot, which we're coming up on a landslide here. Bum, bum, bum. So that's one side of it. Right on the other, down the way a little bit more, is the other landslide. So there were two landslides that kind of covered up this space. I like this slope here too. I might in polish, I might reduce the frequency of the rocks, but otherwise I like the feel of this slope. You can see here too, we still have work that we're doing in Imular. This mountain, this cliff range here needs some touch up, needs some attention. And we'll get to that over the next week or two. Once I'm done with working on the raid spaces, then I'll switch back into that and help support the designer who is working in this region. Let's see. Let me just get myself marked where the last question was. All right. All right, so Soft Snake GR says, but isn't Falothlorn a Rivendell style already? It's certainly using the same kinds of assets that we used in Rivendell, and I think it'll be up to us to really try to find a way to differentiate it visually. I think one of the things that always kind of frustrates me now in a way that didn't frustrate me back when we first did housing and just in general built the game is having exteriors be wildly different from the interiors of the space. And I think the original housing neighborhoods really exemplify that. And so I think like finding ways to make sure that interiors and exteriors match, and finding ways to just like bring a different look, a different color, a different spin on how we use those assets is where we'll lean. I'm gonna run up the hill here. I don't remember if I blocked this off. Mario Justin says, those rock mountains cliffs look amazing. Massive improvement in terrain quality from the early days stuff. Yeah, I think, one of the biggest changes you can see in like old world to new world design is when we started just taking rocks and using them to supplement the terrain cliff faces. Because like doing that, I think does... let's run up here real quick. Can I get up? No, I can't get up there. That's right. That's just a tease. I think one of the things that, really helps make those cliffs that we might have used in the old world designs just be like height map. Adding in the rocks just makes them feel more modern, makes them feel more detailed. I'd still really like for us to be able to push out the loaded landscape, so you're not seeing things like, the low resolution terrain kind of popping through in between the rocks. But that is a technical challenge for another day. Right now, we just really want to get the expansion pack wrapped up so that we can move on. So that we can move on to our next areas. So Wild Mambo Queen asks, what are the starting levels for this region? So the Ikrabon Valley, which includes Amberol and Kudzagin and Imular and this region, Urashtar, are all going to be level cap regions. So they'll be level 150 regions. So if you've played through Corsairs of Umbar, completed all the content there, you'll be right at home in this region. All right. I'm trying to remember what this is. So we are in Marush now. And, this once was an Ordokai stronghold that has since been taken over by Orcish forces, including some new enemies that are new as part of this expansion pack. I'm not going to, and this guy I believe is using placeholder art, so I'm not going to go too much into detail as far as the stories for these areas go, because I do not want to put too many spoilers out there, and I don't want Maid of Lions to physically come to my house and reprimand me. So I'm not gonna delve too much into the stories, at least through portions of this region. This area being one of the spots that I'm not gonna go too deep into story stuff. But this was a fun camp to build. I think one of the things too that over the years you kind of learn how to build spaces like this in a way that is, kind of efficient, so that you can quickly create something without having to worry too much about spending a ton of time in it. There are going to be some things in here that we'll need to address in the as part of a bug, like this thing's floating a little bit, and this is definitely floating, and might be intersecting there. So there's polished stuff that we're going to be working on over the course of the next few weeks up through to launch. But it's like you come up with a method for building spaces like this and are able to put them out there pretty quickly to get them into the hands of the content team. I think that's also one of the benefits of having worked on this product and in these tools for so long, is it's very easy to kind of quickly streamline your processes. One of my other new favorite assets that we got as part of this expansion pack are these just kind of cliff ravine assets. I use them a lot in this area, and they're a great way to kind of show a washout, show the effects of time on the region. And so you have these, rivers that are cutting through, most of these canyons that you can use these ravine rocks as a way to kind of further show the efforts of nature to kind of make its way through. All right, and we'll go up here real quick because, we had the big evil Orcish civilization on one side, and now we have this kind of tiny little outpost of survivors hanging out in behind. This is Ubnishir. Now, please pay no attention to the Bob Breland and Jane Brelands that you see all over the place, particularly for color and whatnot. As we're working on areas like this that are introducing all sorts of new cultures and whatnot, we often find ourselves waiting for assets, basically. We find ourselves waiting for new appearances and whatnot. So what you're seeing here are the default appearances of some of our characters. Um, those will also get handled over time as we go through, but you can see we've got our quest NPCs in here. So you'll be able to fill up on quests here in Ubnishir. All right. So I'm seeing a few questions with people asking about the contents of the various pre-orders. That's not something I can really speak to. I'm not outside of maybe offering up some options and for consideration for housing items associated with pre-orders. I don't really have much interaction with the marketing team as far as marketing and commerce teams as far as what goes into these bundles. So if you have questions and concerns about that sort of thing, I encourage you to go just ask around on the message boards and see if there's any more information you can find there. All right. So Mad Dog Helix says, maybe this was answered, but what are the limitations that the draw distance feels so limited in the game? It always looks beautiful from up close, but panoramics can be quite disappointing. Hope that's understandable. I think I understand the question you're asking. It's something too that like we think about a lot as well. Our game is a 17-year-old game on an even older engine. So there are certainly limitations that are in place when it comes to that. Oh, I want to jump up. Yay, let me jump. So we're limited by what the older engine could do. And, I was listening to Orion talking with Baggins TV earlier today as well. And this kind of comment, not specifically about this, came up, but, oh, hey, falling critter. That needs to get fixed. But just the fact that, we built the game, 17 plus years ago with a certain set of hardware specs in mind, and also just so many generations ago now in terms of graphical fidelity. And while the world has moved on, it's a lot harder for us to move, for the engine of our game to move on. So there's only so much that we can do to make a game this old shine as brightly as we feel that it does. We're really happy and proud of the landscapes, and there are certainly some things that we would like to see changed. It's just a matter of where can we justify the resources to do this change versus that change. Are we going to get a return, a significant enough return on work on the graphics engine versus the work on physics engine versus work on lag, like all of those things. So it's a balancing act. If I could sit down with the engineering team and basically eat up all of their time for 6 months to a year, like I would have a lot of things that I would like them to tackle for us. In the meantime, like we might get some things here and there. I'm still pushing for a way for us to extend the terrain mesh loading. Not to say extend everything that can be loaded, but things like, we've got this near detailed terrain here, but in the distance you see the far terrain. And just finding a way to push out the detail terrain a few more land blocks, particularly for systems that can, manage it. Have it be an option to allow players to kind of enhance the look and feel of their play experience. Eros216 says, you've worked on so many zones and biomes. Is there one that you don't like working on or would prefer to never have to touch again? Trollshaws. I think I've built the region twice, and for this game twice, and in R&D projects built it a third time. Trollshaws, I've got so much history with it that I kind of just don't want to touch it again. I think there are some great portions of the Troll Shaws. I think there are some great places within it, some awesome looking biome assets. But for me, it's more just a like, this again, kind of like, and I know Chris Pearson watching, if he's watching this, is be like, great, you're working on the Troll Shaws next year. Just what I wanted. So King Cookie 95 asks, who decides what mobs should be found in an area? Do you decide, and the people making the quest then build their content according to it, or is it something like a generic camp marker, and then you put down, and then get told what mobs and decorations should go in the place? So we try to have, we call it monster and camp planning. Once we've settled on our region personality for what we're producing, so the research is done, we have kind of that sense, and our content team has had a little bit of time to think about things that they might like to do in the region for content. Then the world team, the content team, the game systems team, and the art team all sit down to talk about what's going to go in the zone. We usually break it out by areas. And then we talk about what kinds of creatures make sense for those areas. After we've kind of figured out what we want to have roaming around on landscape, that then informs what we put into the monster camps. And sometimes, and most times, you will be able to find creatures that are in the mixed spawns having their own camps. But sometimes too, there will be some monster types that a designer is really interested in seeing in the region, but it doesn't really feel great for them to be wandering around on landscape. Like this little guy. We should supersize these and make monster camps full of the jerboas. So sometimes there's a monster that like is interesting, but doesn't really feel like it fits on landscape, so it'll get its own camp. Usually after that, I try to encourage our design team to use our monster camp plan to inform what our deed plans are going to be. And actually what I'm about to be doing, once I'm done building the raid spaces, I'm going to be starting my kind of landscape playthrough. And what I usually do with that is, I pick up the content for the region, I run around at run speed 2 or 3, and just see if I'm feeling like I'm getting enough of the targets that I need for the quests, or if there is a quest that is targeting a creature type that is really uncommon on landscape. I'll go through and I will build out small clusters of specific creature types to help support deeding and to help support quests and whatnot in the region. I don't always have the time for that, and sometimes it slips off my radar, but most times I'm able to get that work in and get our landscape really like singing and in harmony with what the quests want. So Lev Scotland says, when I quest on landscape, I prefer daylight. It's cool to have night, but I wish it was much shorter. I think we must have had several weeks of discussion back when we launched the game years ago about how long day and night should be. And we wanted to make sure that we hit a good combination of night not feeling too long, but also having the cycle not feel like it was always a certain kind of day, certain time of day when you logged in each day. So it's like the day is set, so it's offset just enough so that as you're kind of rolling through and playing from day to day, you get something a little bit different. Could night be shorter? Maybe, but a lot of times too, that's driven by the individual, or at least the visual of nighttime is driven by the day file itself. And some day files are brighter and night ends sooner than others. Then I need to have a drink. All right. Let's see. Sandira says, excited, would the team be to upgrade to a new engine? What would that entail? Upgrading to a new engine is no simple feat and likely a non-starter for this product. But what we often find ourselves doing is looking at what other engines produce in terms of features and whatnot, and seeing if we can find ways to incorporate some of those things into the game. Quick pause from that, so you can see here we've entered into Amberol, which we previewed in the first week of the previews. This was kind of a one-way drop. Originally, I had planned for this to be, two ways, but after some discussion with content and figuring out, determining like what the purpose and role Urash has in the narrative, it was requested that it become a one-way access. So you can leave Urash, but you can't easily get into it outside of the major ways that we want you to get into it. Just because narratively, it didn't make sense that that kind of opening would be there, because if that opening was there, then why not, why would other story things not happen in the way that we arranged them to happen? I really like the look of this water, of our Umbar water, in contrast with the tans of the region. One of the things that was challenging too with building this was like, how do we build this without kind of having the Angmar effect, right? Like we didn't want, I think one of the big problems with Angmar is we tried the concept of having, the landscape be bleak and then using the creatures as the color pops, as opposed to the scene assets being the color pops. And I don't think we really were super successful with that, because that led to some very wildly colorful creatures in the region. So I think here, like, we've got the tans, and then there's kind of this red rock. Again, someone had mentioned this has a little bit of the Iron Hills feel, and I think that's the red debris and whatnot here that kind of speaks to that. And then using the blue water and the green from the palm trees to kind of act as your, whistle wetter, the break that you get from the tans. I think I want to change the time of day a little bit. Let's go to 7. There we go. So one of the things that I do really like about this region as well is often you can get these views of the sun settling into the various canyons. And then as it gets lower, you get the God ray effects of the sun. Even just like passing through here, you can see some of it. And I think that just, when you peek around and you just get the bloom of sunlight, that feels great. When we upgraded to DX10, there weren't a lot of the like special visual features that we incorporated, at least that were overtly incorporated. And I think those God rays are some of the biggest and most successful ones from the DX10 implementation that we brought in. Oh, that poor boar. I think he needs to go to a spa. Or find some nice mud. All right. So yeah, to go back to the engine conversation, I'm not going to get super deep into the details of it because, something like that, there are known knowns and then there are unknowns. And there are often a lot more unknowns than there are knowns. I think there are a lot of great features in modern engines that would really benefit Lord of the Rings Online. And if we ever had the time to kind of assess those features and then work with our technical art and engineering teams to incorporate them, I think that would really like bring that new engine feel to the game in the way that the per pixel lighting helped bring that new engine feel to the game. So you'll notice that some stuff here popped in. One of the things that's usually on the toward the tail end of our development processes is a far view pass, where we go through and we run around the landscape and we find stuff that feels like it needs to render out a little bit further, such as these spider webs. So we'll go through and add some additional properties to them to kind of push out the distance at which they'll render, so that you don't get a surprise spider camp like we just had here. Granted, I am running a bit faster than usual. I think I'm running slightly above the speed of someone on a war steed right now. So, oops, spider camp is less likely to sneak up on you in the way it did us. But it's still something that, we try to go through and mitigate where we can and where it makes sense. Let's see. Going back to the regions that I wouldn't want to work on some more, Gorindus says, my Hobbit sympathizes with your Trollshaw's angst, but for different reasons, mostly due to visibility. Yeah, I think one of the things that is hard for me with Trollshaws is it's also very much a arcade zone as opposed to a world zone. It is a fishbowl region that has a lot of content packed into it, so that makes toning down the fishbowliness of it a bit challenging, because you do too many tweaks and too many changes, and then all of a sudden you have to do a full region regression just to make sure that quest objects aren't getting eaten up by the landscape and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a complex region that really does epitomize our older arcade / fishbowl style design, and I've spent more than enough time working in it, and I'm happy to not work more in it. All right, going down through for a couple more questions. Forvagor says, will the instance for this region, where will this instance be located? Is Urashtar going to be home of the raid? Yes, Urashtar is the home of the raid. So we can take a look at the map real quick. We do have, I think, our nearly final maps. We might do one more minor pass on them before the end of everything, particularly where we've done work on the impassables and whatnot. We want to make sure those are represented. But Urashtar exists up here in Sur Akil, the Gorge of Woe. It's interesting that we were getting Sur Akil down here too. I might need to take a look at the block map properties just to make sure that things are lined up where they're supposed to be. But yes, the raid will be in the Gorge of Woe. The landscape around there is going to be kind of similar to the western half of the flooded Undercity portion of Umbarmok, where it's going to be group-oriented landscape. But access to where the raid is, there's going to be a very defined path to where, basically safe defined path to get up there. So all right, we're whipping around here. We just took a quick look at, this is another hub. A lot of the hubs in Urashtar are actually these kind of smaller outposty things. We had the first one where the epic stuff is happening. We have this one here. Ubnashir is similarly just this small little hub. There's not much for big civilization going on in these regions. So this is another area where I'm definitely going to need to do some far view placement, because you can see here there's some substantial structures that are just kind of popping in. And I missed the water. There goes my ankles. So Jess, hopefully you saw that. I see you asked if you could see the map. Carissa 1066 says, speaking of drinking, this landscape is more arid. Will your character be affected by this, similar to the cold in Forashell? So there are no stat detriments, basically, to being in these areas that are more arid. I think that sort of thing, like we did in Forashell, we did it more because we're like, oh, that would be interesting, as opposed to it really, like, adding to the gameplay in a way that wasn't annoying. Like, I think the, like, cold spots in Forashell were an interesting idea, but they often just didn't feel like they were either substantial enough to matter, or inconsequential, or they were not substantial enough to really matter, and thus, like, ignorable. Or you could do something about it, but is it worth the extra effort to do something about it? No. We might need to talk to Art about our tortoises not swimming when they're in water. That's interesting. All right. So Liquor Rock says, "Will there ever be new boar textures?" One of the things that I would love to see is more of a, like, razorback, like, shaggy boar. We have these boars that, like, I mean, this looks shaggy, but there are the razorback boars, which their tusks aren't as wild, but they've kind of got that, like, back ridge, and it's just this dense, shaggy fur that I think would be a great APR for us to get at some point. Particularly, when we were doing our monster planning for Umbar and for this region, like, the razorback boar came up as a pitch for art, and ultimately, you kind of look at your schedule, you look at, oh, how many artists do we have? How much time do we have? And sometimes things just have to get cut. And new boar APRs are one of the things that just had to get cut because we didn't have the time to support it. If we had all the time in the world, definitely love to see new boar APRs and a lot of new appearances for a lot of different things. But time is the villain to us all. There is a villain to us all. Let's see. Zerzak says, does the engine kind of feel like it's being held together with bubblegum and duct tape, especially after 17 years? I think there are some things that this engine does really, really well. It is honed and tuned to be a tool for developing landscapes. And I think it does a really good job at that. There are certainly some things that could stand to be improved, but there are some things that I think, when you look at the core of this engine and then you look at other engines, and you can kind of see the things that we've been doing for I mean, honestly, decades now, being some things that more modern engines are just now being like, oh, hey, yeah, we're going to add this, we're going to find a way to bustify that. Like, so, there are certainly spaces for improvement, but there are also parts of it that I think work very effectively. Yeah. All right, let's see. Mario Justin says, last week there was a question about designing distant views for yet inaccessible, non-developed areas visible from the current zone, and the answer was that Urash Stroll would be a better opportunity to answer that, Any thoughts this week? So yeah, so kind of where we crossed over, and we'll kind of head back towards that way. At well, maybe let's head back. Let's head towards that way now. I'll bop up through this valley up here, and then we'll loop around back to head up through Surak Hill. So I think, when building Farview, it's important to have some detail, but you don't want to spend so much time working on it that you're basically spending as much time developing it as you would normal landscape, because there are just parts of it that players aren't going to get close enough to ever see. So a lot of times, and I think this is really well exhibited in places like Gondor and other areas that have steep mountain ranges as their far view that have trees on them. Those scene files just have the trees in them, and they may even have trees that are sized in exaggerated manners in order to make them better appear. Those scene files aren't scene files that we would use in normal playable landscape because they're just awkward. But we need to make those very specific files and sizing choices in order to make the imposters for those trees read well in the distance. So as we continue down this valley, I think you'll probably get, assuming this is the right build, we should have enough for it. You'll start to see, yep, so we crest up over here and you can see the cliff line there in the distance, and you can see the rocks in it. And for that, most of what I did was I just painted the cliff a cliff texture, added in some extra detailing here and there just to make it feel contoured, and then I just put the rocks all in it. And that gives you a silhouette and gives you a sense of a completed space. But I basically did this whole impassable from the bridge here over the course of, a day, even less than a day, to kind of fill this out and make it feel like a finished view without it actually being finished. We can take a little bit more of a look at it down the way. We'll stop in here real quick at another one of our hubs to just take a quick peek and see what folks are doing. They're wandering around. I think one of the things that has made building towns so much easier and made them feel like they have a sense of life are these static NPC entities right here. They're not anything you can interact with. Their animations are literally just walk back and forth on a flat surface. And stuff like that is so helpful to make a town, like this guy up here too, it's just a static decoration. There's no NPC logic. He's just animated to kind of walk back and forth a little bit, look at something, and then cycle that animation. And it just helps a town, helps a quest hub like this feel like it's got a little bit of extra deco without adding weight to it that a character has. Because all characters, whether it's a vendor, a quest NPC, anything that's dynamic, adds more weight to it. Whereas these guys are basically just treated as decoration. I love the feel of this day file. This is an awesome time of night. We got the sunset coming in. This kind of gives me, what I was really hoping for was those Lone Landish vibes. I am noticing, I think my monitor that I'm running the client on, its temperature is a little bit different because I'm looking at the screen that the stream is on, and it's much more red, whereas this is a little bit more pink. So I think I need to adjust some settings on the left monitor a little bit. But we'll continue on down through here, so you can see in the distance as well, we've got the we've got the kind of ridge line with the rocks that have been jammed in to just kind of add extra silhouette and depth. When you've got the fog, it almost helps the fog, even though this is a linear fog, it helps the fog feel like it has some volume at the distance. And then likewise, we'll come up here. I think the other thing that's really tricky too is you have to figure out how to restrict sight lines a little bit. so that you can kind of get away with the least amount of work in the distance as possible. So let's tune it up to midday here. So it's like even if you are in the water, you don't get a huge view of everything, but you want to give just enough detail so that you can kind of imagine something beyond. And the thing with doing all of this work too is like when we go to build regions where you can see in places where you can see out into the impassables, you then have to be like, okay, well, that work that I just did, that couple of days I spent working on that, when we go to build that region, I just have to nuke it. That kind of happened when we did work for the angle. We built the angle. The designer who built that built the angle, and then we had to build some impassables, like mountains and hills and whatnot, in the distance, so you could see where like Cardolan and Swanfleet were without actually being able to access it. And then when we were like, okay, we're doing Swanfleet and Cardolan, that work that I had put in to sculpt those rough mountains, I was like, okay, I'm gonna just wipe that all out now in order to build the actual regions that go there, and they're gonna look very different. I think that's one of the things too that we have kind of accepted is that when we do that work, we shouldn't try to make what is the old impassables govern what our new impassables look like, or what our new region is going to look like, because oftentimes those impassables are just exaggerated in order to make it look and feel like something, make it look like a lie. So Evelset says, are there any dwarf settlements in this region? There are no dwarf settlements in this region. This is a dwarf-free region. I think we've all had our fair share of dwarves for a while, so we're happy to have a bit of a break from them. On world design, how do you determine how big a zone is going to get, since not everything is told by Tolkien? So we have a couple of high-level global maps that we reference, and then when we come to planning, we roughly scale what we've built to kind of fit within those maps, and use that scale to determine what we then fill in things with. So like, we'll back out here. So, we have this map here, which is roughly to scale with our landscape. And then we, say, okay, we'll overlay it with a grid, and then say, okay, well, this area was this many land blocks, so now we want to build like this many land blocks. So that's kind of how we determine the scale on things. As you can see, we've updated this map to incorporate the Valley of Icarbon, which is awesome. You also notice too on this map, and again, this is actually something that Orion talked about with Baggins TV earlier today too, how like, we're in areas where like we'll call something, near Harad, far Harad, but for the people that live in those areas, it's not near Harad to them. That's why we have Shagana on the map and Jarmat on the map, because those are the names that the people that live there call it. And we are outsiders from Eriador and Rovanian, coming into this region with our own names for things, and we're not going to have a conversation with a local in Amberol about near Harad, because they're going to be like, near Harad, what's near Harad? Their point of reference is, this is Shagana. It's fun playing around with the geothermal assets again. This was a like late in development edition where I think like I had not included this point of interest in my original planning for the region in terms of building POIs, And then at one point, one of our content designers was like, "Oh, hey, what about the hot springs that are supposed to be here?" And I was like, "Oh, do you need them to be in a specific area?" And the designer was like, "No, not really." I'm like, "Great, we're gonna put them right here. We have space for them here." Good old wasps. Urashi wasp. I had fun in Gundabad playing with the Grodbog hive assets. So one of the things that I wanted to do here is when we were doing camp planning and whatnot, we were trying to like figure out what to do for camps. We didn't want them to all be, at least in this region, all be like orc camps or evil people camps. So we're like, well, what can we do to make a camp that is like distinct? And one of the thoughts that someone said was like, well, what if we did a wasp and grim camp? And so that's how we have like this camp here, where it's just a hive that's kind of broken out from the cliffs and taken over this small Hamadi town, and then within it you have the windstorm grims kind of patrolling around as well, the Urashi sandstorms. What do we got here? Umbar artifact chest. Ah, yes, the for crafting. So yeah, it's always sometimes fun too to figure out like, okay, so how do I theme a camp around this? Like, it's an interesting idea, but what do I do to like build a theme around it? All right, let's scroll down a little bit more. So King Cookie asks, how do you decide where and what level NPC camp guardians should be placed? There are some at level 50 and 150 in the Shire. Some regions have them at their local level cap, and some don't. I think it really depends on the actual object, the actual thing that is placed. Because sometimes there are some that whenever, whatever template is used to build them, they just go up to whatever the current level cap are. There are others that are set at a specific level. So it really does vary based off of where they are and what's being used. For this region, for the Valley of Ichabron, like we made a set of level 150 characters. We can also override the level of things on the generator that they're attached to. So if we decided we don't want them to be level 150, we want them to be level 30 to 35, then we can set that on the generator, and anything that spawns off the generator will be that level. All right, so we are almost done with this stream, and we're coming up to the end of the valley as well. We'll take a look at a couple more of these little camps here. These are orc camps. Again, like another, like you kind of, once you've worked in a setting for so long, you kind of have a sense for the visual language involved in making certain kinds of camps, and they come together super easy because of that. Pardon these guys. They're all fun sized, and they're using placeholder artwork. So we'll bop down, we'll head across the river, because I also skipped the scorpion camp. So what we'll do, since we're almost out of time, I'll find myself a good spot to hang out. We are coming up on the ruins of Utuk Bur, which is where the raid will be, but there is story stuff there, so I'm not going to get too close to it because I don't want to spoil anything or talk out of turn. But I feel like this is a good spot to kind of park us right now. I'll set it to a nice calming sunset. There we go. And let's see what we have for the remaining questions before we wrap up our stream. So Eros216 asks, how complex are stable points to implement in the game? So the stable system is not a particularly intelligent system. So it's not like I can just put down, all of the paths and then the game will automatically determine what ones to follow to get where it needs to get. When we build it, we basically create path segments throughout the world So from, intersection A to intersection B. And then we have a file that we use to construct the routes that are basically just like this section to this section to this section to this section until you get to your destination. So it is a good amount of handwork to create those routes. Eventually, it would be great to update the system so it's not as much handwork and the system can path a little bit more intelligently. But I doubt that that is a feasible reality for our travel system, at least not without some significant intervention to make that happen. Turbon 8 Or says, how do you or your team decide what zones to add to the game next? There are many zones that have roads leading down out but are currently blocked. So when we're building these things, we are trying to follow a narrative, and usually we go where the story tells us to go. If we have completed a storyline, like we did with the Trials of Durn, or we kind of have to sit around and say, okay, what's next? Where do we want to go next? And we pitch our ideas. And then once we have an idea for a direction that we all are on board with, that's when we start thinking about, okay, we go to this region, we go to that region. This is the path that we kind of want to follow to get to where we need to go. So hopefully that answers that question. We often leave breadcrumby kind of things in the world so that we can both have openings for future editions and also just to better imply that there's more to the world than just what you have access to play. So you look at this map, for example. It's like to Nimshatum and to Adagim. And both of those, like, we may not go there, who knows? But they're there to imply a bigger world. They're there to, like, we're not in Farharad yet, but we still have that listed there. We're not in Khand, we're not in Harandor. But I feel like having that information in there just helps ground you in the reality that this is a world. It's not a theme park of region connected to region connected to region. It's a world, and we're working to fill out that world. Let's see. So we've got Follyman Me says, scenario, I'm a 3D artist with tech art skills. I love seeing first stage refs, and it would be a dream to help build these landscapes. I've talked with Daybreak before, but the artists there work in all franchises. I feel working for SSG is what I'm looking for. I've never found a place to apply for SSG directly. Could I open talks? So I don't know that our website very specifically has job postings on it, but the Daybreak website does have listings, and it should indicate what studios those listings are for. So if you are a creative, you are a designer, you are an engineer, you're looking for that kind of role, take a look at the Daybreak website and see what is open and available there. Lev Scotland asks, what is your favorite part of your work? My favorite part, I really like the big, broad design challenges. Taking the planning maps that our World Lead produces and incorporating those plans into an actual functional landscape, like doing the broad swath height map work, doing the broad swath scene file painting, and then also thinking about how do we go about streamlining processes, how do we go about incorporating new techniques into our processes to help us build things more effectively, build things faster, build things broader, bigger. So that's my favorite aspect of it. Imagor says, how about a treasure seeker deed? Do we have treasures here? So the landscape is dotted with resource nodes, which include our prospecting nodes, our wood nodes, camps and whatnot have the scholar nodes, as well as 2 tracks of reputation focused resources that you can gather as well that are scattered throughout the landscape. So while there isn't a specific deed for those things, you do kind of get your treasure hunting feel as you're going around collecting those resources. I do also believe that the treasure caches are back as part of this expansion pack as one of the exploration deeds. We have them in other regions where you just, you find the random caches on landscape and there's X number of them in a region, sort of thing. Let's see. See if I can scroll down. Forbagor says, will there be an Elven Oasis in this zone? There is no Elven Oasis in Urashtar. I'd say there is something Oasis-y in this zone that I did not show off, again, because I don't want to spoil anything too much. But there is something ish in this region. It is not elves, but it is Oasis-ish. Liquor Rock says, why are the orcs so big? So you can see this little guy here. He's a normal orc. The ones that were the big ones, those are using placeholder art. We don't have the final art in for them in time for this build that I'm showing things off at. But they're getting their own art, and hopefully, in theory, ideally, the scale of them will feel more appropriate once that new art is in. FR94 says, I'm quite new to the industry, working now as a junior character animator. One of my dreams was to work for this game. Hope one day I'll be able to. I went to school for animation, and when I was working on Asheron's Call, I did a ton of animation, and it was a lot of fun to do. I think one of my favorite things to do was animate anything that had more than 4 legs. Just wild and crazy, legs everywhere. The Ulthoi and Asheron's Call one were a ton of fun. So animation is awesome, and hopefully, whether or not it's working a dream job or just working for your own personal portfolio or just enjoyment, have fun with that animation. The burning question, do we need to be looking for a giant deep claw in this zone? I actually haven't placed a giant deep claw in a while. I should probably get on that. Let's see. All right, we'll do a couple more questions, then we'll wrap up. Are there any interesting non-instance raid interiors in the region that are just for exploration, quests, and camps? There are a couple of interiors that aren't related with the instances. In this region, there's a scorpion cave that we didn't take a look at because I'm holding that off for next week's stream, as well as a couple of story-related instances, and the kind of oasis-y thing that I was telling you about. All right. There's a question about multi-tracking for nodes. I can't answer that. And then so we'll wrap it up with Denathan's question. Are we still expecting a Bullroar preview of Legacy of Morgoth this week? I wouldn't put expectations on it this week. I think we were hoping to be able to do it this week, but there were some build complications that kind of prevented that. So sometime next week is where we're looking at for Bullroar 1. So yeah, you will all be able to get in to check it out. The first Bullroar is going to kind of be restricted to the first 2 regions so that we can kind of focus attention on those areas, get people playing through them, and getting a lot of good driven bugs on those specific areas. And then following Bullroars will open up the other regions as well. Anyways, so I think that does it here for everything. We've taken a look at all 4 of our landscape regions. So thank you all for coming along for that ride, answering the questions, asking questions as well. So yeah, lots of exciting stuff happening. Like I said at the beginning of the stream, our pre-order for Legacy of Morgoth is now available. You can check out our website, lotro.com, for information on that. We've got our Bullroar coming up soon, like I said, hopefully next week, assuming everything goes as planned. And next week, I will be doing my final stream in this series in which we take a look at all the various interiors that are associated with the expansion pack, be it, a couple of humble abodes here and there, all the way up to taking a look at the instances as well. We may have a special guest to come in to talk about the mechanics and whatnot within those instances too. Still ironing out the details on what we're going to do for that stream, but at the very least, it will be a lovely tour of the interiors and dungeon spaces for the region. So, thank you, everyone. I see one last question from Druid's Fire. When the next Cave Troll stream, the combo stream with myself and Orion is going to be, we're aiming at those being the second Thursday of the month. I don't think we're going to do it for October. So basically, starting in November, we're going to aim for the second Thursday of every month to be our regularly scheduled. We have a Cave Troll stream. So thank you, everyone, for attending the stream. Looking forward to seeing you all next week. Be sure to check out the message boards and social media if you have questions regarding Lord of the Rings Online, particularly the pre-order and what comes with it. So thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.